Thank you, Senator Kane. I want to talk a little bit more on the, Mr. Secretary, I mentioned the dispersal of forces in the Indo-Pacific that just made strategic sense, but there's also a operational need. I have a chart I'm trying to get here, but I've shown it to many of you. I've brought it to many hearings, and it's all the activity we're getting in the North Pacific, in the Arctic, with regard to Russian and Chinese incursions into our airspace, our ADIZ in Alaska, and our EEZ into our waters. In the last 3 years, we've had a whole host of Russian bear bomber missions and Chinese naval task forces in an unprecedented manner, joint Russian and Chinese strategic bomber task forces and naval task forces. So the need for infrastructure from which to project American power in this part of the world, refuel, intercept these incursions is really, really important. So can I talk to you about that just briefly, Secretary Marks, as you're looking at the laydown? You need dispersion because you don't want to get attacked, but you also need dispersion and force projection capability because this is the homeland, right? This is the northern border, and they are very active up there. And then Mr. Saunders, the Indo-PACOM commander, and particularly the NORTHCOM commander, have talked about the need for additional airspace, logistics, but also runway space on the Aleutian Islands in ADAC, in western Alaska, Galena, Dead Horse, northern part of Alaska, because when these brave airmen and women do their intercept missions, if it's February over the Arctic Ocean and you're flying an F-16 and you lose an engine, you better want to have infrastructure capability for a SAR mission. So I'd like to get your views on that. Hopefully you've listened to what the NORTHCOM commander has said with regard to forward infrastructure basing for aircraft and Navy ships to project American power in a part of the world that's getting very, very busy. We are on the front lines in Alaska with great power competition, and it's a regular occurrence. That's our border. Nothing more important than that.
Senator, I appreciate that, and the level of detail as you have laid out. And in fact, as I mentioned to you in my hearing, as goes Alaska Defense, so goes Homeland Defense. Yeah. Right. So I agree with you there, Senator. The development of the National Defense Strategy that we're working on, we owe that to the Secretary here by August, focuses on Arctic maritime strategy, Arctic strategy. I would also echo General Guillot's comments, which he as well stated that when you're at those long distances, having the ability to launch SAR, as you mentioned, is of critical importance. And so what I would want to continue to do, Senator, is one, acknowledge you have the threat, I think, assessment exactly correct. And I think from there is working through the processes we do, both the National Defense Strategy, the protection of that, and how that works to protect U.S. interests up there is of vital importance. We'll continue to focus on that as we move forward, but I'll defer to my colleague.
Great. Mr. Saunders, you probably heard General Guillot talking about, air station capability at ADAC, right? There's two 8,000-foot runways there right now with fuel, as I mentioned. In Galena, which, as you know, that's Western Alaska, used to be or interior kind of Western Alaska, used to be a Air Base. King Salmon, that's another area, used to be Air Force Air Base. Dead Horse, which is the most northern part of Alaska, where there's a civilian airport there, but the ability to launch SAR rescue missions there is really, really important. I have the chart here. I'll show it real quick. As you're answering, I'll just put it up there. It gives you a sense, right? We're very busy up there. It oftentimes doesn't make the lower 48 news, but I'll tell you, it makes the news in Alaska, and it should, right? When you have Russian and Chinese joint strategic bear bomber task forces with armed MiGs coming into our ADIZ, you put the other one up here too. We need to protect ourselves and protect our airmen. If you looked at any of those installation upgrades, we already have them in all those areas I mentioned, runways, former bases. that we could use for more infrastructure and power projection to address this. And here's just the number. And the green is joint ops, Russian, Chinese operations, either joint strategic bomber task forces or joint naval task forces. And heck, we even got a balloon task force when the Chinese sent their spy balloons over Alaska, which our Air Force did a great job of shooting down. You have an update on that?
Yeah, Senator Sullivan, thank you for that. What's not lost on me is our interim national defense strategy has us focused on Indo-PACOM, but first defending the homeland, which basically addresses both of these issues as you're talking about the Alaska region and the Arctic.
So this is homeland,
exactly.
Indo-PACOM because it's North Pacific, and Arctic, right? I mean, it's all three. I was meeting with the incoming Supreme Allied Commander he had his confirmation hearing yesterday. You look at Alaska, the other thing that's really important but also challenging, and Mr. Secretary, that's why you're so important, you have the seams of all these different combatant commands, right? You have NORTHCOM, you have EUCOM, Russia, you have Indo-PACOM, and you have STRATCOM because of all our missile defenses in Alaska. That's 3-4 critical combatant commands right there in that part of the world, and that's why our adversaries are all over it, coming to our territory. So I'm sorry I interrupted, but you want to unpack that comment a little bit more?
No, it's really just reiterating your point that our focus is on the Indo-PACOM and defending the homeland and these other areas. As I mentioned in an earlier discussion, we also prioritize our combatant commander requirements. So as those combatant commanders identify requirements and increase their priority within those requirements, it influences our priorities for both MILCON and FSRM investments, and that would be no different in these areas that you described. The only other piece I would add with respect to the Air Force and in this region especially, our agile combat employment concept allows us to be able to work not only from fixed installations but from other installations, and that would help address a lot of the areas that you're working at. Even if it's having access to Dead Horse, doesn't necessarily mean it's a permanent installation, but it means that we can station aircraft perhaps on the civilian airfield as it is today to be able to provide the support that we need in certain times.
Well, I appreciate you saying the emphasis on the combatant commanders because, again, just to reiterate, the Indo-PACOM commander and the NORTHCOM commander in full committee hearings have said we need to reopen ADAC. Right there, that's 1,000 miles west of Hawaii. That is real strategic terrain. That's the gateway to the Arctic. That is on China and Russia's flank. When I've talked about reopening ADAC, the Chinese Communist Party goes nuts. They hate it, which to me is a good thing, right? And then you have all the different NORTHCOM commander requests. That's Dead Horse, Utqiagvik area, Galena, King Salmon, all out here, but these are critical areas that the NORTHCOM and Indo-PACOM commander have both said that they need. So we'll want to work with you, Mr. Secretary, and your counterparts here on making those a reality.